So there's no point in beating around the bush in terms of the media. The media has put out the information for all to see, and that is the US federal government is putting in place a law, working on a law where there will be age verification in operating systems. So this has moved from the state level, which was initiated by California on October 13, 2025, and moved to states like Colorado, Illinois, and a few others. Michigan, from what I hear, has recently withdrawn their push for age verification in technology. But none of that matters now, as this has moved to the federal level. So the federal government is going to mandate that all technology in the United States, in terms of operating systems and possibly apps as well, take measures to verify the age of everyone that uses those apps and the operating systems. So the protests that have emerged around this is not so much the age verification itself, but that this sets a legal precedence for the governments at a state and federal level in the United States to require that you scan your driver's license into your computer or some version of that, so that when you use a computer, they know who you are. See, some of you, when you go on social media, you're able to post comments and nobody knows that you posted those comments. But with these new laws, everybody will know who you really are. You won't be able to hide that you posted a certain type of comment. Now, I have not used anonymous identity on the internet since around 2011. Around 2011, I made a personal decision to use my full name on the internet. So all of my accounts is my full name, Michael Gaucher, right? So if you find me on Quora, if you find me on LinkedIn, if you find me on YouTube, if you find me on any number of these places, I have enough pride in my name that I don't need to hide behind a handle, right? I don't have to call myself Crimson Lord 256, right? I don't have to do that. I'd rather, okay, I'm Michael Gaucher and I said these. I said what I said. But that's my personal choice, right? So ID verification doesn't have an impact on me, but it does have an impact on many others. And it also has an impact on people who want to, what do you call that? Test things out a little bit. And maybe they want to try some new website, some new service. They just want to test it out a little bit. And they're not ready to commit their full identity to it. So maybe they want a fake Facebook profile. Maybe they want a fake LinkedIn profile. Whatever the case may be, they want to have just a different identity, so that if things go wrong, they can pull out without being fully identified in some kind of social media stream. Well, you might still have the ability to create fake profiles, but those fake profiles will be tied to your real world identity, because if this legal precedent goes forward, then the next step is going to require that you put your driver's license or your state ID and social security information, all of the above, birth certificate, right there into the computer. And there are many of us, millions of us, we don't trust computers enough to go that far with it. We don't find computers that trustworthy. We might do some transactions on the internet with our credit card, our debit card, but that's as far as we really want to go with it, right? And it's like, okay, so we're going to put our birth certificate into the computer. We're going to put our driver's license into the computer. We're going to put our social security number into the computer. And then hackers from a whole different side of the world are going to go in and grab that information and cause havoc in our lives. Well, anyway, I have went into great detail about age verification in a previous video, and that's not the purpose for what I intended to discuss here today. On a lighter note, I am pleased to see that Linux 7.0 is coming out. I'm pleased to see all of that, right? And then on top of that, I am pleased to see that Linux has reached a level now in terms of its maturity that the user base has increased to about 5%, I believe. So we've come a long ways. 5% is significant for an operating system that and we're talking about among users, not in terms of like all the other stuff. Because if you're talking about servers and you're talking about tablets and all these other things, Linux is greater than 90%. But in terms of actual users, people using it on a laptop or a desktop, Linux share has climbed considerably over the last 2 years. So the real discussion today is about KDE versus GNOME. It's like Emacs versus VI, right? So I've been using GNOME for a long time, but every social media influencer that I see, not every, I mean, that's an exaggeration, but there's a significant number of them that they have real credibility in my view. They have real experience similar to my own, where they swear up and down that KDE is the best desktop or somewhere in that ballpark. And so I said, you know what? I've tried KDE prior to my time messing around with YouTube. You know, when I say messing around YouTube, messing around with it as a person who view. See, I didn't really watch YouTube prior to 2022. Prior to 2022, I didn't really watch YouTube. So YouTube didn't exist in my mind. You know, I started my YouTube channel in 2019, and I started posting videos, but that was simply to have that information out there for people. And I'd post and I'd go on and I'd move on, and I just, you know, I didn't watch YouTube like I do now. So I was in my own world, in my own bubble. And in my own world, in my own bubble, GNOME was the best thing since sliced bread when it came to high performance, high reliability, and the highest investment among major companies that contribute to Linux in fostering a Linux desktop. Which is ironic for me because I am a huge advocate for C++. And KDE is much more aligned with C++ than GNOME is. GNOME is written in C primarily. And although C and C++ are related, the communities couldn't be more different. And with C++, in theory, you would have the ability to write code in terms of a desktop like KDE, to write code that's not necessarily faster, but code that is more secure, more stable, more reliable, and easier to test, verify, and create and use to create features because of the abstractions in C++. So for that reason, I said, in theory, KDE would be an ideal Linux desktop. Every time I used KDE in the past, it didn't live up to it, and I could not stomach KDE for more than, let's say, a day. I inevitably try to give it a day or two, and I'd always find something wrong with it. It's either some bugs or the performance didn't hold up to the hype that I've heard. And this is pre 2020, right? Pre 2019. So then I tried it off and on between 2019 and 2024, and I've always been disappointed. So then when I started seeing many of these major YouTube Linux influencers talk about KDE, I was like, what's wrong with them? I was like, what are they seeing? But then I had to think about it. I was like, they've been using Linux for a long time. So what am I missing? And so I think it came down to the fact that I may have been using the wrong distribution, or I had hardware that was not up to the task. So some of these enthusiasts, Linux enthusiasts, you could call me one of them, but a Linux enthusiast, they have some really good machines that the general public don't have. They have souped up towers and souped up hardware, and it's great to have that, and that's exactly the type of hardware where a desktop environment like KDE is going to shine. And so I chose GNOME because I tend to run my systems for a longer time, and my hardware for a longer time. 5 to 10 years. I might use a laptop or a desktop for 5 or 10 years, and so I don't do frequent upgrades. Partially for financial reasons, but for other reasons as well. And so GNOME I found to be more appealing to me in terms of lasting longer on older hardware while embracing newer features and concepts. Recently, I decided to give KDE 6 series a spin, and I did it in Fedora. So I've been running Debian for a good while, and I still advocate for people to use Debian as their primary Linux environment. But I'm using Fedora simply for software development reasons. Fedora has some aspects for software development that I find useful. So I'm using Fedora for the time being as I work through a number of software development initiatives. And I find good company in that regard, as the developer of Linux itself in the past has preferred Fedora. And so my first video on this channel is about how to migrate to Fedora. So I said, okay, let me try Fedora, the KDE version, because if anybody is going to integrate KDE properly with a desktop distribution, it's going to be the developers of Fedora. And that doesn't mean other distribution developers can't do a good job of that. I just know that the Fedora developers are really going to have their heart into it, right? And so that's what I did. So I got the Fedora KDE version and installed that, and lo and behold, the improvements and benefits of KDE that the proponents and advocates of KDE have presented, I found it holds up. So I've been pleased with KDE, and I can finally say that I can use KDE, and I've used KDE for more than 3 or 4 weeks. I've been using it for well over a month now, And that is the longest I've used KDE. And so it looks like it's going to stick. Now, the reason why I think KDE is a good idea, if you can run it properly, is that it gives you the Microsoft Windows approach to the desktop menu and the way windows are set up, way your different application windows are set up. And many of us, I dare say the majority of people in the world, find that to be more productive. And the only alternative, mainstream alternative in Linux that we had that did the same thing was Cinnamon. And so I preferred Cinnamon for the longest time. But the reason why I am hesitant to recommend Cinnamon these days is for a few reasons. One is that despite what people might feel about X11 versus Wayland, by default, most Linux distributions will emphasize Wayland. So I want to use the code and the platform that's going to be the most stable offering of that. And both Fedora and KDE are going to be the most complete way, less fragmented, less chaotic way to transition into Wayland. So you have that. The second thing that I see with this is that, and there may be more to this story than what I understand, but it appears to me that there is more investment financially. There's more financial investment behind KDE than Cinnamon. The reason why I think that matters is that desktops can be susceptible to security vulnerabilities in ways that people don't fully appreciate. And I think that the way that KDE is developed using C++ as opposed to C in GNOME and Cinnamon allows KDE to move in a more secure direction than I think. And I know some people will debate that. Some people say that's uninformed. And I can get that. But my point of view in terms of C++ is the same point of view that people have towards Rust. See, Rust is billed as this way of building secure software. And yes, C++ can have many of the same security vulnerabilities in terms of coding practices as writing C code if you're writing C code in an uninformed way. But it's easier to adopt higher level secure coding practices in C++ at scale, right, compared to C. Yes, you can learn some secure coding capability. I've read the books by Ryan Secord on secure coding in C, right? I know it's possible, but I don't see that as scalable. It takes much more time to get a new C developer or an intermediate C developer up to speed on secure coding in C than someone that has 5 to 10 years of experience in C++. Because in that latter case, it is far easier to encourage that developer to use abstractions and libraries that will fit into a coding pattern that's going to deliver a more default secure stance in that coding practice than you would imagine being done in C. Yes, you can mitigate this all day long in terms of the argument that I'm putting forward here. But I think by default, out of the box, it is easier to sanitize and secure C++ code than C code. And you can't do that in C++ to the extent that you do in Rust. But if you're going to use something that is that has higher performance and gives you more flexibility than Rust, but still gives you a gateway to more secure coding conventions and practices, I think you have a stronger case with C++ than you do with C. So as a result, then you would have potentially a more stable and more rigorously defined desktop environment with KDE versus Cinnamon. And I found it to be the case. It is not the case that KDE has less bugs than Cinnamon, because that's one of the detractors that I've found with KDE in the past. And I see some glitches every now and again, but I can live with them. They're not showstoppers in what I'm seeing in KDE. But I see far more defect artifacts in Cinnamon that I've had to look the other way over the years. And I think that it's beneficial to be forthcoming about that. So to wrap this up, I am using KDE. I am enjoying KDE. It is growing on me. And I still install the GNOME apps that I'm used to. And it's a good thing about Linux that both type of applications can coexist. Even though the applications that I'm writing that doesn't depend on either KDE or GNOME, since I'm using .NET for Linux. But yes, I'm enjoying KDE on Fedora, and I think it is now ready for prime time. And I hear that there are new developments in terms of KDE 6.7 that's coming out, and I think that from the point of KDE 6 forward, that we now have a desktop that I think that more of us can recommend to more people who are transitioning into Linux. So that's all I have to say on the topic. And if you have any comments or questions, put them in the comment stream to this video. And until then, I will see you on the next one.